Have you ever felt a strange kind of tiredness that has nothing to do with your body, but everything to do with pretending to be okay? A weariness from constantly managing your energy, your smile, your healing, your growth, as if wholeness were a role you had to perform rather than a truth you could live. Most people won't say this out loud, but the more spiritual they become, the more exhausted they feel. Could it be that what we call high vibration is not lightness at all, but the gravity of truth finally setting in? In modern spiritual circles, the phrase, "raise your vibration," has become both a mantra and a trap. It whispers that joy is proof you're doing life right, that confidence is the fruit of inner work, and that anything heavy, uncertain, or angry is a sign you've regressed. But Carl Jung warned of this exact illusion, the repression of the shadow in favor of the persona. We've confused high vibration with high performance. We've mistaken alignment for appearance. And in doing so, we've built temples out of avoidance. True high vibration is not a polished frequency you achieve by bypassing your wounds. It is the raw, unfiltered honesty that arises when all your fragmented parts begin to reunite. It doesn't feel like constant positivity. It feels like a collapse. When your energy begins to harmonize, you don't float above the world. You start to feel the parts of yourself you buried. You start to see the truth of the people around you. You start to grieve the comfort that numbness once provided. There is a secret most people never talk about. The more healed you become, the more destabilized your life may appear. That's because your nervous system stops tolerating fake safety. You begin rejecting shallow conversations, empty validation, and roles that require self-abandonment. Your frequency rises not because you're doing more, but because you're holding less. Less pretending, less pleasing, less proving. And that shift, that subtle but seismic shift, is what creates the friction. The vibration doesn't just move energy, it breaks attachments. You'll find yourself crying for no reason, unable to explain why certain things don't feel right anymore. You may even look around and feel like your old life is peeling off your skin. That isn't regression, that's recalibration. So no, high vibration is not about being above it all. It's about being so deeply within yourself that nothing can stay that isn't true. It's about letting go of the illusion that peace always feels good, because sometimes peace feels like finally telling the truth and watching everything false fall away. This video is not here to help you vibe higher. It's here to help you stop betraying yourself in the name of spiritual aesthetics. What if the frequency you've been chasing has been inside your honesty all along? Before the mind understands what is happening, the body often speaks first. It does not argue, explain, or negotiate. It simply reacts. And when inner alignment begins, the body becomes uncompromising in ways that can no longer be ignored. Consider a woman who has worked in the same office for 20 years. On paper, nothing is wrong. The job is stable. The people are polite. The routine is familiar. Yet every Sunday evening, her stomach tightens. By Monday morning, she has a headache that painkillers barely touch. Over time, the headaches turn into migraines. Then comes exhaustion that sleep does not fix. Medical tests show nothing alarming. Doctors say it is stress. But the stress is not from the workload. It is from self-betrayal. Her body knows she is living a life that no longer matches who she has become. Or think of a woman who stays in a relationship that looks acceptable from the outside. There is no obvious abuse, no dramatic conflict. But every time she prepares to see him, she feels nauseous. Her chest feels heavy. Her appetite disappears. She tells herself she is overthinking. She reminds herself of the good moments. yet her body refuses to cooperate. Jung would say that the unconscious has reached a point where it can no longer be silenced. The body becomes the messenger when the psyche is ignored. This is the moment many people misinterpret as weakness. They say things like, "I used to handle this just fine," or "Why am I suddenly so sensitive?" But this sensitivity is not regression, it is refinement. From a Jungian perspective, as inner fragmentation begins to heal, the split between what you feel and what you tolerate starts to close. When the psyche moves toward wholeness, the body stops carrying contradictions on your behalf. You may notice this in subtle ways at first. A sudden wave of fatigue during conversations that require you to shrink. A tight throat when you agree to something you do not want. A racing heart when you walk into spaces where you perform rather than exist. Over time, these signals intensify. What once caused mild discomfort now produces physical resistance. The body withdraws energy from environments, roles, and relationships that demand dishonesty. Jung understood the body as part of the psyche, not separate from it. He believed symptoms often arise when a truth is being lived unconsciously, but denied consciously. As psychological integration deepens, the body becomes the final authority. It no longer allows the mind to rationalize compromise. You cannot explain your way out of a migraine. You cannot logic your way through chronic exhaustion. The body enforces boundaries long before the personality learns how to speak them. This is why high vibration does not feel gentle at first. It feels disruptive. You may suddenly need to leave places you once endured. You may find yourself unable to smile through conversations that drain you. Foods you once tolerated may no longer sit well. Social obligations may feel physically heavy. Your system is recalibrating around truth rather than tolerance. What makes this stage especially difficult is that others may not understand. They may say you are being dramatic, fragile, or difficult, but from an inner perspective, something precise is happening. The body is no longer willing to absorb the cost of inauthentic living. It is protecting the integrity of the whole. This sign asks a confronting question. What if your symptoms are not problems to eliminate, but messages to decode? What if the body is not failing you, but guiding you away from a life that no longer fits? And if your body is rejecting what is not true, what truths have you been postponing simply because you were able to endure the discomfort before? These are not easy questions, but once the body begins to speak this clearly, silence is no longer an option. There comes a moment when life no longer feels like it's happening to you, but through you. At first, it feels subtle. A phrase you were just thinking appears in a stranger's conversation. A song plays on the radio that perfectly echoes the ache in your chest. A person enters your life carrying the exact emotional lesson you've been avoiding. These are not random. They are fragments of your unconscious made visible. Carl Jung called this the acausal connecting principle, what we now call synchronicity. But before you understand the language of symbols, it can feel unsettling, even magical. Suddenly, your thoughts seem to ripple into the world. Your emotions shape the mood of a room. The questions you don't say aloud start getting answered by life itself. This is not wishful thinking or spiritual exaggeration. It's the psychic reality beneath the surface of your daily life. The more internally aligned you become, the less distance there is between what you feel and what you experience. Take, for example, a woman who spent years hiding her loneliness behind a busy social life. She appeared cheerful, successful, and always available. But the moment she began therapy and spoke, for the first time, the truth about her fear of abandonment, her external world began to rearrange. The friends she once felt safe with became strangely distant. Men she used to attract no longer responded. New people entered her life, but only those who required her to show up in full truth. It wasn't punishment. It was her reality, matching her new internal frequency. This is the strange paradox. When your unconscious shifts, so does the field of your life. Jung believed that the psyche seeks wholeness above all else, and it will draw in experiences to reflect whatever is unresolved. If you carry guilt, life will mirror situations that provoke shame. If you carry a wounded child archetype, you will meet people who abandon, belittle, or dismiss your needs. But once you bring those wounds to light, the mirror changes. The world becomes a reflection of coherence, not chaos. But here's the unsettling part. When the mirror changes, so do the people in it. You may lose friendships that were built on versions of you that no longer exist. You may leave jobs that once felt like your calling, but now feel hollow. You may even grieve an identity that once felt like home. Because when you become coherent inside, life can no longer support incoherence outside. The illusion of separation dissolves. You are not just watching reality, you are co-creating it. So ask yourself this: what parts of your life are still reflecting a self you've outgrown? What patterns keep repeating, not because the world is unfair, but because your unconscious is asking to be seen? Do you notice the signs, the repetitions, the strange timing? Or are you still pretending it's all just a coincidence? The truth is, when reality starts responding to your inner world, you can no longer pretend you're asleep. You are in conversation with something much deeper, and it will not stop until you listen. You might not have changed your haircut, your job, or your social circle, but suddenly people start treating you differently. Some become magnetized by your presence, opening up within minutes, as if they've known you for lifetimes. Others become cold, irritated, or strangely competitive. You haven't said or done anything overtly different. So what shifted? The answer isn't on the surface. It's in the field of energy you now carry, the silent transmission of your inner work. Take, for example, a man in his early 40s who quietly began doing shadow work after a painful divorce. For years, he had been the nice guy, always agreeable, always available, emotionally invisible. But as he started integrating his anger, his unmet needs, and his childhood wounds, something began to change in how people responded to him. At work, colleagues who once overlooked him began acting defensively in meetings. One even accused him of being intimidating for simply expressing a boundary. Meanwhile, strangers at cafes would strike up vulnerable conversations as if drawn to a depth they couldn't explain. His outer world had shifted because his inner world had deepened. Carl Jung explained this phenomenon as projection activation. When you become psychologically integrated, when you no longer repress huge parts of your psyche, you start to carry a rare and confronting presence. You unconsciously mirror back to others the parts of themselves they've disowned. To someone who has buried their grief, your emotional honesty may feel threatening. To someone who is addicted to validation, your inner security may seem arrogant. Your wholeness doesn't just speak, it provokes. Not because you are doing anything, but because your being disturbs their unresolved reflection. This is why some people immediately trust you without understanding why. Your presence feels safe, familiar, and grounding. Not because you're perfect, but because you've met your own darkness and survived it. They sense it in your eyes, in your silence, in how you hold space without fixing or fleeing. You carry the weight of someone who has sat with their soul. But the same depth that magnetizes some will repel others. The person who thrives on control may find your authenticity unbearable. The friend who once loved your insecurity may now call you too much. The lover who once relied on your emotional availability may feel destabilized by your newfound boundaries. This is the painful beauty of individuation. You begin to polarize. Neutrality fades. You become a tuning fork, resonating with what's real, disrupting what's false. And while this can feel isolating, it's actually a sign of alignment. You're no longer bending to stay liked. You're no longer leaking energy to stay accepted. Your presence now speaks louder than your words ever could. So if people are reacting strongly to you without clear cause, pause before you blame yourself. Ask, what are they seeing in me that they haven't faced in themselves? What am I activating that they've suppressed? And even more importantly, what parts of me am I still shrinking just to keep others comfortable? When you stop muting your soul, people will hear themselves more clearly in your echo. Some will thank you, others will leave. Both are responses to your truth. There comes a moment when staying invisible requires more effort than being seen. At first, you may try to ignore it, telling yourself nothing has really changed. But then, life starts responding in ways you cannot control. You walk into a room and feel eyes turn before you speak. Conversations pause, dynamics shift. This is not imagination. It is the natural consequence of an inner state that has become too coherent to camouflage. Consider a woman in her late 40s who spent decades mastering the art of blending in. At work, she was competent but quiet. In relationships, she adapted easily, never wanting to be a burden. She learned early that safety came from being agreeable. Then, after years of inner work, something subtle but irreversible happened. She stopped apologizing for her presence. She no longer laughed to soften the truth. Without trying to stand out, she did. Meetings grew tense. Some colleagues grew distant. Others suddenly treated her with unexpected respect. A close friend confessed, "I don't know why, but you feel different now." What changed was not her behavior. It was her inner alignment. Carl Jung described this phase as the shedding of the persona. The persona is the social mask we wear to belong, to survive, to be acceptable. It is not false in itself, but it becomes dangerous when it replaces the self. As individuation progresses, the psyche withdraws energy from this mask. You no longer have the inner fuel required to pretend. Your voice steadies, your gaze grounds, your silence carries weight. People sense this before they understand it. This is why attempts to remain neutral begin to fail. You may notice that even when you say very little, your presence still registers. In family gatherings, you become the one people react to without knowing why. In social settings, you are either gravitated toward or subtly excluded. Some people lean in, eager for depth. Others pull away, unsettled by something they cannot name. Jung would say, you are activating unconscious material in them. Your authenticity reflects what they have avoided in themselves. This stage can be deeply uncomfortable. Isolation often follows. The familiar ease of blending in disappears, but true belonging has not yet arrived. You may grieve the loss of anonymity, the simplicity of being unnoticed. You may even try to shrink again, lowering your voice, softening your opinions, dimming your presence. But the body resists. The psyche resists. Something in you knows that going back would be a betrayal. Real life often brings this lesson through consequences. A woman may be passed over socially because she no longer plays the role of emotional caretaker. A man may be labeled intimidating simply for standing calmly in his truth. A long-time relationship may fade because the unspoken agreement of mutual masking has ended. These are not punishments. They are signals. The system you once belonged to was built on who you pretended to be. Jungian psychology teaches that when the persona dissolves, authenticity becomes visible and often unsettling. Not everyone wants the truth reflected back to them. Not everyone is ready for depth. This is why high vibration does not feel light or glamorous. It feels exposing. It demands discernment, but it also opens the door to connections that are no longer based on performance. Eventually, something shifts. You begin meeting people who recognize you without effort. Conversations deepen quickly. Silence feels safe. You are no longer required to explain yourself. These connections may be fewer, but they are real. They see you because you are finally visible to yourself. So if you feel unable to hide, ask yourself a different question. Are you losing safety, or are you shedding a mask that kept you small? Are you being rejected, or are you being filtered? And are you willing to stand in your truth long enough to meet those who can see you clearly without needing you to disappear? This is the cost and the gift of individuation. Invisibility is no longer an option. Integrity is. At some point on this path, the obsession with signs fades. Not because they stop appearing, but because your inner world no longer needs external proof. You stop chasing synchronicities like omens and stop asking the universe to validate your worth. Instead, you begin to live from a deeper rhythm that does not ask to be seen, understood, or applauded. Consider a woman who once relied on tarot cards, spiritual affirmations, and endless online readings to reassure herself she was on the right path. She clung to every angel number and full moon ritual to silence her self-doubt. But over time, the rituals began to feel empty. Not wrong, but hollow. Something shifted. She no longer needed confirmation. She began walking into rooms without explaining her energy. She no longer practiced her spirituality. She embodied it. And the most shocking part was that the world adjusted. The people who used to question her boundaries stopped trying. The relationships that once drained her simply dissolved, not with drama, but with quiet finality. Jung would call this the return to the self. After enough layers of persona are stripped away, and the projections of others no longer sway your truth, you begin to stabilize in your essence. The self is not concerned with being seen as good, healed, or high vibrational. It simply is. It functions like a compass buried deep within your psyche, guiding your choices without the need for loud signals. You begin to feel when a room dishonors your spirit. You sense when a conversation contracts your energy. You walk away, not to prove anything, but because your body and soul cannot tolerate dissonance. It becomes physiological. You can no longer betray your peace to win acceptance. This stage often surprises people because it lacks fireworks. There is no grand finale, just a quiet refusal to abandon yourself. You no longer beg people to stay. You no longer explain why you are walking away. You simply let it end. There is no panic when a door closes because you understand that every rejection is a recalibration. You are no longer on the hunt for signs, love, or validation because you realize you are the sign. Your presence is the message. Your energy does the speaking. There is nothing to prove. But can you trust that silence is an answer? Can you believe in who you are when there is no audience clapping? When no one sees your growth, would you still grow? That is the final test of the self. You live not for display, but for alignment. And that is the most powerful frequency of all. Let the comments open the dialogue. Have you reached this phase where you no longer crave validation? Or are you still caught in the loop of needing proof? What does your body tell you when something no longer aligns? And do you listen? There comes a moment when you stop seeking signs, not because you've grown indifferent, but because you've become the sign itself. What once felt like a mystical confirmation now feels like a natural extension of your being. This is the quiet power of inner coherence, not performative peace, not borrowed language about healing, but the realignment of your internal world so deeply that your body no longer lets you lie. Your nervous system becomes the compass. Your boundaries become cellular. You do not preach your worth. You exude it, not with noise, but with the unshakable stillness of someone who has returned home to themselves. Carl Jung taught that wholeness is not about becoming something new. It is about integrating all that we are, the wounds, the contradictions, the exiled parts that once begged for proof they belonged. When this integration occurs, the psyche becomes harmonious. The shadow no longer needs to scream. The ego no longer needs to perform. The self steps forward as the silent witness and the steady guide. And when the self leads, there is no need to manipulate perception. Reality begins to organize itself around your truth. You stop chasing, you start attracting, not because you desire to be magnetic, but because alignment is magnetic by nature. But here lies the paradox. With coherence comes responsibility. When your body tells the truth, you can no longer stay in conversations that shrink you. When your energy is clear, you instantly feel the distortion in someone else's intentions. You begin to lose your taste for drama, but that also means losing your tolerance for shallow connections. You may find yourself walking away more often, not with bitterness, but with sacred clarity. You do not explain. You do not apologize. You simply cannot betray your soul's rhythm just to maintain appearances. This is where many retreat. Because coherence is costly, it will ask you to disappoint people. It will demand that you risk being misunderstood. It will strip away illusions of control and force you to trust a deeper intelligence moving through your life. High vibration is not glitter and light. It is choosing silence when the ego wants to speak. It is sitting with discomfort rather than escaping into spiritual bypassing. It is refusing to dim your light just to avoid being too much for someone who hasn't yet met their own depth. True spiritual maturity is not the absence of conflict. It is the ability to remain internally honest in the face of it. You stop abandoning yourself to keep the peace. You stop betraying your needs in the name of compassion. You understand that the most sacred act of love is not sacrifice, but self-honoring. Not because you are selfish, but because you know that dishonoring your soul to be loved is the oldest wound you refuse to repeat. So the question is no longer, do these signs appear in my life? The real question is, can I carry the weight of clarity? Can I live in a world that may not always affirm me and still refuse to abandon myself? Can I walk through the fire of transformation and emerge without bitterness, but with a deeper reverence for who I've become? Because in the end, high vibration is not an achievement. It is a responsibility, a sacred devotion to living from the truth you've worked so hard to remember. If this touched something sacred inside you, don't let it fade into silence. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your presence here is not just support, it's resonance. And if you feel moved to give back, your donation becomes a quiet but powerful gesture that helps keep this light alive for others still walking in the dark.